Welcome to Encore Learning Presents. I appreciate you being here. I know it's a lovely day out there, so there's lots of other things you can participate in, but I think we have a very exciting, I know we have a very exciting topic today. But before I get into introductions, I do want to make sure that everyone knows how to participate. And if you have questions, to be able to put those in, present them to our speaker. So what you do, if you have a question, is you type it into the Q&A function. You just find the icon, open that up, submit it. You won't see the question in the Q&A. We have those hidden, but trust us, we have it. And we're going to hold all the questions till the end of the set presentation. Also, we have the option of a live transcript or closed captions. That's something that's under your control. You can either have it up on the screen or not. So in order to do that, you just find the icon, turn on or turn it off. And when you leave the webinar or when it's finished, there'll be a request to complete a survey. It's very brief. We encourage you to take it. And if you have any technical problems, send an email to info@encorelearning.net and they will help you troubleshoot. And one other thing, I just want to make sure that people are aware of our next Encore Learning Presents event. That is Monday, as always, on June 24th, 3 o'clock, same time. And we will have author John Milliken, who will be talking about changes that have occurred in the Virginia politics over the last 56 years, mostly driven by economic and demographic factors. And if you have moved to Virginia during that period, you are actually part of that story. And of course, it's still being written. I'm looking forward to hearing his analysis. If you're a political junkie, like many of us are in here in the DC area, you want to make a note of that date and attend. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and introduce our speaker today. We are pleased to have on hand Dr. Joe Schwarcz, known simply as Dr. Joe by many of his fans. He is a professor of, Louise, okay. We're live, Louise, if you may want to, okay, thank you. Yeah, he's a professor of chemistry and has used that knowledge to help ordinary folks like ourselves better understand the world, particularly when it comes to unscientific claims, or on the positive side, lead us towards legitimate beneficial products or practices. On his weekly podcast, he covers a broad range of topics, and he's appeared on many different TV shows, and he's host of the Dr. Joe Show. He heads up the Office of Science and Society at McGill University, which supports his mission to demystify science. I know he mentioned to us just before we came on that the Office of Science and Society is getting ready to celebrate their 25th anniversary. And I think they've done some great work. I've been on it. They have some great content. I encourage people to find that website. Now, since many of our audience members may not be familiar with you, Dr. Joe, perhaps you can share with us how you developed an interest in science and use that to explain the world, as well as a bit of maybe your personal background in terms of your journey, having spent at least your early childhood in Hungary. With that prompt, please, if everyone could give a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, I can tell you a little bit. I was born in Hungary last century, and it was under communist rule. And in 1956, with the Hungarian Revolution, we managed to escape, actually crawling under the barbed wire to Austria. Since my mother had a sister in Montreal, this is where we ended up. And I actually got interested in science in grade 6 through the most unusual factor, a magician. I was invited to a birthday party, and my friend's parents had hired a magician to entertain us. And he did most of the tricks he did were eminently forgettable, but one was memorable because he pretended to magically link together 3 ropes into one long rope, and he pretended that he did this with a magic chemical. And I wondered why he said that. Why not abracadabra or hocus pocus? And I knew there was no magic chemical involved, but it intrigued me enough to take out a book on magic and take out a book on chemistry. And I followed both of those ever since, because there are similarities. Everything a magician does on stage is perfectly explicable by scientific means. It's just that the audience isn't privy to those means. And chemistry can look absolutely magical. You pour two solutions together, you get a color change, and if you don't know anything about indicators, it might look absolutely magical. So that's how I got interested, and then I had the chance to go to university, study chemistry, become an academic, and eventually got interested in separating sense from nonsense, which is what we have been doing for decades through my office here at McGill. All right, so with that little intro, we'll get started with a little story about a gentleman who was being tormented by his wife, who was accusing him of being, not exactly honest with everything, basically accusing him of infidelity. Every day he came home, she would look at his clothes, see if there were any loose hairs to try to find evidence for his crimes. But one day he decided he would really fix her. And he made sure that there was not a single hair of any kind. He used a lint brush so that she had nothing to complain about. So he went home and she looks him up and down and gets more angry than ever. And he says, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And she says, "Well, now you're running around with bald women." He made, or at least she made, the right observation, but came to the wrong conclusion. And science is all about making observations and coming to conclusions. That's what we do here through our office. We try to separate the sense from nonsense, and we do this without any conflict of interest. It makes no difference to me or my colleagues whether or not any food or cosmetic or drug is regulated or not. The only thing that matters is that whatever decision is arrived at based on proper scientific principles, not on emotion and not on hearsay. Well, the topic that I'd like to discuss with you here today is one that probably has rattled around in your mind. It is the problem of aging. It's a bad idea. Nobody wants to do it. Robert Browning, famous British poet, said, "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be." Well, Robert Browning must have been clowning. Old age is not the golden years. It's more of the rusty years. We're not happy to have to light all of those candles on the cake. And we're cognizant of all of the problems that confront us when it comes to aging. And there are all kinds of problems, unfortunately, that come our way. But then there are scientific solutions to the problems as well. Although not everyone is always happy with those scientific solutions. You know that no matter what we do, our body eventually wears out. However, not at the same rate. We all know cases of people who smoked like steam engines and lived to be 100. But then again, those that smoke like steam engines aren't around to tell us about it because they're usually 6 foot underground by the time that they reach their 60s. But wouldn't it be great if we could actually turn back the clock? If there really was some sort of fountain of youth? Well, you know what? There actually is. You have to go to Florida, more specifically, St. Augustine, Florida, and there you will find the fountain of youth. Seems to be strange that it's to be found in Florida because We don't have all that much evidence for youth in that particular state. But there it is, the fountain of youth. And you can read the plaques that are all over the place that will tell you how Ponce de Leon, the Spanish explorer, found this secret place, and that it was possible to just take a bath in there and come out young. He was puzzled by this. The story, of course, is probably apocryphal one. The only thing that we know is that Ponce de Leon did not have a very good interaction with the natives. He was actually killed in a battle with them. But I guess there's no harm in going there to try this fountain of youth. But I can assure you that there is no magic in that water. What we're looking at is a myth. And there are many myths that we can look at in terms of aging that have come our way throughout the millennia. Many, many, many anti-aging regimens that have been highly touted. For example, we can go back to the days of the Bible and King David. Let me just remind you of the particular passage that we have in mind. When King David was old and advanced in years, and although they covered him with clothes, he could not get warm. Therefore his servant said to him, "Let a young woman be sought for my lord the king, and let her wait on the king and be in his service. Let her lie in your arms." Well, that was interesting, rejuvenating therapy. And I think the king really did feel much better after. Although I don't think that there are many physicians today who are willing to write a prescription for elderly gentlemen about young women. The Romans also had some interesting ideas. The Vestal Virgins, who looked after the temple at night, would sleep in a room that was basically close to the outside, except for a few vents. And in the morning, the elderly Roman gentlemen would come and inhale the exhaled breath of these ladies through those vents, because the word was that that was a way to rejuvenate themselves. Not much scientific evidence for that. Neither is there any evidence about Ji Hong in the 4th century recommending a medicine made from herbs and monkey brains that would lengthen life up to 500 years. And then we have Cleopatra, who tried to roll back the clock by taking a bath in donkey milk. Well, you know what? That was not quite as ridiculous as it sounds, as long as it was sour donkey milk, because sour milk has lactic acid in it. And lactic acid is one of these alpha hydroxy acids. And you may have heard of this because these are actually found in creams, because they cause a faster turnover of cells on the surface of the skin. So they actually do have a minor rejuvenating effect. In the 16th century, Elizabeth Báthory in Hungary had a different idea for a rejuvenating bath. She took bath in the blood of young women that she had murdered. Obviously, a horrific saga. In the Middle Ages, urine was thought to be the key to longevity. How is this? Why would they think that something that comes out of our body as an excrement could be the key to longevity? Well, this takes us to 1669, when Hennig Brand in Germany, an alchemist, was experimenting with boiling down a vat of urine. Why? Because the alchemists were actually looking for what they called the philosopher's stone, which would turn metals into gold by some sort of, magical method. And they tried all kinds of things. Why did they think it could be found in urine? Because urine is the color of gold. And the idea was that we might be born with a certain amount of gold in our body, but slowly would pee our life away. So Brand collected urine, started to boil it to see what would be left behind. Would the residue be gold? He boiled and boiled, and the sun went down. And this was before the days of lighting, of course. And he saw something that really did look magical. The flask began to glow. He thought maybe he had really found the secret of life. He had found the philosopher's stone. No, but he had discovered phosphorus, because urine contains phosphates. And when you boil those down to driedness, they will interact with some carbon residue in the urine, and the carbon will strip off the oxygen, and you get elemental phosphorus. It was a monumental discovery, but it didn't have anything to do with longevity. In fact, phosphorus would very soon be killing people because it could be used in warfare. It was certainly a very incendiary substance. And then, not much later, C.W. Hofland in Britain had another interesting idea about slowing down the clock. Laughter is the most healthful exertion, he said. Sort of, laugh your way back to health. But he also had the same idea that the original Romans had, which was that there was certainly happiness to be had in sleeping in the proximity of youth. Well, now we get to some real science. In the 19th century, Charles Brown-Séquard, who was a professor of physiology and, in fact, highly respected, published a lot of papers, did some very interesting work. Later in his life, he married a young lady, and he was worried that he might not be able to sort of come up to snuff. So he did some interesting research on longevity on animals. And he discovered an interesting feature. He found that with dogs, when you removed their testicles, they aged very quickly. But if you re-injected them with an extract of those testicles, you could slow down the aging process once more. Well, of course, this was enough for the quacks to come out of the woodwork and all of a sudden start selling what they called Brown-Séquard's extracts of animal organs, testicle extract, etc. Well, nobody really knows whether or not this really had any testicle extract in there, but certainly this was not a product that did anything. I mean, I suppose it could have done some harm if they, accidentally injected some infected serum, but it certainly would not have slowed down the aging. One of Brown-Séquard's disciples was Serge Voronov. He originally was Russian, but he had emigrated to France where he did his research. And he became very interested in what Brown-Séquard had done. But he thought he could improve on it. Thought instead of, macerating the testicle and making some kind of an extract and injecting that, why not just use the whole testicle and implant that into the scrotum of a man who wanted to be rejuvenated? Well, at first, he experimented with monkeys, and he thought that he had some positive results and he could extend this work to humans. Now, in those days, you didn't really have ethics committees. It wasn't so hard to do experiments. Question was where to get the testicles, because men, of course, were not lining up to be donors for this experiment. So he actually made a deal with the French government. In those days, executions were carried out by hanging, and he made a deal with the government that executed criminals would have their testes harvested, and so that he could use them for his experiments. And interestingly enough, his patients said that they felt better after they had been treated in this way, after his testicle had been put into their scrotum. However, pretty soon he ran out of executed criminals, and people were still clamoring for the treatment. So he thought, what's the next best thing to human? It would be a primate. So he actually started a ranch where he raised monkeys. Why? For the sole purpose of harvesting their testicles so that they could be implanted into humans. This is not science fiction. This was real. Obviously, this procedure was not loved by the monkeys. Neither was it embraced by the scientific community at large. For example, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, was a physician, and he objected to these experiments. And he made fun of them in one of the best Sherlock Holmes stories, which is The Adventure of the Creeping Man. It's a story of an elderly professor of physiology, and Sherlock Holmes is called into the case when his children find him in the back garden, swinging on a tree, limb from limb. And Holmes eventually figures out what had happened. He was in love with a young woman, and again, he was worried that he might not be able to perform. So he had injected himself with monkey gland extract and made a monkey of himself. And this was Conan Doyle's way of poking fun at what he thought was a ridiculous treatment. In Austria, Eugen Steinach had another idea. He thought that if he was able to just tie off one of the ducts leading from the testes to the body, it would force the testicles to produce more of whatever they produced. Because the fluids were blocked, it would try to push through and produce more of this chemical. Not a totally ridiculous idea. So anyway, basically what he did was he performed a partial vasectomy where he cut off one of the sperm ducts. And he showed that in animals, this resulted in rejuvenation. And he even experimented on men who claimed that indeed they felt better after they had been treated in this fashion. One of his famous patients was Sigmund Freud. Interesting. Here was someone regarded very highly in the psychiatric community, and yet he subjected himself to this unproven procedure. In the United States, John Romulus Brinkley heard about all of this goings on in Europe, and he thought he'd get into the game. Trouble was, he wasn't a physician. All he had was a mail-order degree from a diploma mill. But he had grown up on a farm where he had seen the antics of goats. He saw how horny they were. And he wondered whether or not a goat testicle would work in humans. Now, once again, goats, of course, were not very appreciative of this procedure. But nevertheless, he performed this, believe it or not, over 1,700 times. He came to be known as the goat gland doctor. He would take a testicle from a goat, implant it into the scrotum of a man. As I said, he did this over 1,700 times, even though he really had no training in surgery. But what he would do would be just to make an incision in the scrotum and insert the goat gland. He didn't connect it to anything. So, of course, nothing got into the circulation, except if some substance was just naturally, extracted from the testicle, which may be a possibility, that testosterone, which is the main product produced by the testicle, could in fact leach out and get into the bloodstream. So one could look at this as the very origin of what today is called testosterone treatment. As you may know, Today, elderly gentlemen can be tested. It's a blood test to see if their testosterone level is low. And if it is, testosterone supplements can certainly have a rejuvenating effect, at least in one particular area of life. So, we go back to all these stories in the 1700s and 1800s, and, it seems to be kind of silly using gland extracts and testicle transplants. However, that is really what led to legitimate research that eventually, resulted in the chemical synthesis of testosterone and using it in therapy. Testosterone, of course, is not used for women. For women, the sort of the parallel product is estrogen. And estrogen tablets are prescribed to women, especially ones who suffer terribly from menopausal symptoms. Now, this has been a controversial area, as you may know. Up to the 1960s, it used to be quite common that whenever a woman reached the age of menopause, she would be automatically prescribed estrogen because it does reduce certainly the symptoms of menopause. But then there were some studies that kind of suggested that there was an increased risk of breast cancer with the use of these estrogen tablets. And that story, of course, got a lot of publicity, and women started to really shy away from estrogen, and especially from Premarin. Now, Premarin already had a bit of a negative aura because of where it comes from. As you may understand from the name Premarin, it comes from pregnant mare's urine. So there already were stories, about, women using estrogen supplements actually swallowing horse urine, which is, of course, total nonsense because the estrogen was highly purified. The fact that it came from urine is irrelevant. But, that's kind of a difficult thing to explain to some people who have no scientific background whatsoever. But in any case, more recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a major study that has followed for the last over 40 years women who had taken estrogen to ward off menopausal symptoms. And it turns out that all these long-term studies show that, in fact, there isn't an increase in breast cancer. So, science is a self-correcting discipline. You always go by the data that you have available at any given time. But generally, as science progresses and more studies are carried out, you have to change your mind. So right now, I think the original warnings about increased breast cancer in women who take estrogen are no longer substantiated by the science. You may also have heard of human growth hormone. This is a very interesting possibility. Human growth hormone is a naturally occurring substance produced in the pituitary gland in the brain. And it does exactly what the word implies. It triggers growth. Once we are fully grown, the body produces much, much less of this substance. It still produces some because it is needed for maintenance. But of course, the question that arises, is it possible that if we tweaked the amount of human growth hormone in the body, if we didn't let it decline the way it normally does, would it also keep us younger? Because higher levels of human growth hormone are associated with youth, lower levels with the elderly. Well, a study was mounted to study this, and it was published in New England Journal of Medicine back in 1990. And it made headlines because the researchers had listed men over 60 years old that they treated with human growth hormone, and they found some very interesting results. The men really claimed that they felt better, they felt younger. And there were data that proved that this indeed was the case. There was an increase in their lean muscle mass, decrease in fatty tissue, increase in skin thickness, increase in the average density of lower back vertebrae. All of these are good things. Once again, as you can imagine, the media love this kind of story that finally the secret to aging has been found. The fact is that the study was stopped after 6 months because there were side effects that were noted. Of course, that the media did not latch onto. And the story actually got, such play in the media that the original author of the New England Journal paper actually had to write a letter saying that they had, in fact, stopped the study after 6 months because of unacceptable side effects. But by that time, clinics had been spawned, mostly in Nevada, that claimed to inject people with human growth hormone and make them younger. And of course, they based all of this on the paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Well, this was a definite scam because in those days, growth hormone was only available by extracting it from the pituitaries of cadavers. It was very expensive. In the study that I mentioned, it cost about $17,000 per subject for the 6-month period. Now, of course, these clinics were not charging anything like that. So they couldn't possibly be injecting human growth hormone. So these were, just scam clinics. But when word got out that this was a scam, well, the scammers are very adept at then changing the course of their, journey and coming up with some new nonsense. The new nonsense was the secretagogue. And this is the way the story went. Human growth hormone is a protein. Proteins are made up of amino acids. Proteins are just long chains of amino acids. The secretagogue idea was that they had here in one package all of the amino acids that are found in the human growth hormone, so that if you just swallowed this, you would give the body all of the raw materials it needs to build these proteins. It sounds reasonable, once again, to someone who is not well versed in the ways of science. However, there's a huge, huge but here. Let me give you an analogy. This is like taking some bricks, windows, and doors, dumping them all on an empty lot, standing back and waiting for them to self-assemble into a building. You'd have a very long wait. You have all of the raw materials that you need to make a building, but you don't have the builders who will do that. Well, in the body, those builders are molecules we call enzymes. They are the ones that facilitate all the chemical reactions. So the reason that our production of human growth hormone winds down as we age has nothing to do with not having enough raw material. We have enough raw material. We eat enough protein to supply us for all the amino acids that we need. The fact is that the enzymes that normally take those amino acids and make them into the growth hormone, those are the ones that are deficient. So these secretagogues are totally useless. It's not going to lead to elevated levels of human growth hormone. And furthermore, there really are no long-term studies that show that injecting oneself with human growth hormone is beneficial. In fact, it may be quite counterproductive because it may also be possible that it stimulates the growth of tumors. So this is not something that should be recommended. Let's take a look at some other interesting ideas about decreasing our rate of aging. You've all heard about the benefits of drinking a glass of wine a day, right? There's been a lot of publicity about that. And the science here is all about a specific compound that is found in red wine. This compound is called resveratrol. And it is indeed an interesting compound. It has a lot of research behind it. Much of it done by Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard University, who is certainly a highly reputable researcher and has done a lot of good work on aging. And he has looked into the mechanism of, how this compound in red wine, resveratrol, may actually be doing something. And it's all about increasing the amount of a set of proteins called sirtuins in the body. And these are important in controlling inflammation, insulin sensitivity, repairing DNA, etc. And he has carried out some very interesting experiments. And here is the one that has been widely reported, whereby he took 3 groups of mice and treated them differently. One group got the standard laboratory diet, another got a high-calorie diet, and the third group got a high-calorie diet supplemented with resveratrol. Results, the mice on the high-calorie diet, as you might imagine, got fat. So did the mice on the high-calorie diet that was supplemented with resveratrol. But there was a difference. The ones that were supplemented with the resveratrol were healthier. They had cleaner arteries. They had less inflammation. So that was pretty interesting. However, what the media left out of all of their reports is that the amount of resveratrol that was used in these experiments was the amount that would be found in about 100 bottles of wine. So nobody is going to suggest that you go and drink 100 bottles of wine, because alcohol itself is a carcinogen. But David Sinclair is a very legitimate researcher, and I had the chance of meeting him when he was invited guest at one of our public symposia. And so we discussed this sirtuin business at length, and the red wine. And he, of course, agrees that red wine is not the way to go. Alcohol is a carcinogen. But he believes that sirtuin or resveratrol supplements in a pill form may be the answer. However, at this point, it's very difficult to make those supplements because this is a notoriously unstable compound. But a number of companies are now working on ways to make viable supplements of resveratrol. Then there is the story of diet restriction, which again has been widely discussed in both in the scientific literature and in the popular literature. And there really is something to this. There's pretty good evidence that just reducing calorie content of our diet, that is essentially eating less, can enable us to live longer. Sounds bizarre, but the story takes us back to 1935 when Clive McKay at Cornell University found that when his mice were fed fewer calories than normal, they lived longer. That was a fascinating observation. And he was not the only one to notice this or follow up on this. Dr. Roy Walford, California physician, followed up on this. And he thought that it was possible by restricting calorie intake to live to the age of 120. And he said he was going to give this a try. And indeed, he restricted his own calorie intake. He, as you might expect, he became quite skinny. Unfortunately, he was not able to bring his experiment to a conclusion because he died of ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which has nothing to do with the diet that he was following. But the fact is that since that time, There have been a lot of studies in animals, and we now can say, pretty conclusively that calorie restriction is the only strategy that has been shown to extend life in a variety of animal species, including in the rhesus monkey, which is a pretty close relative to us. And here is a classic example of that, where one was fed just a normal diet and the other one is on a calorie restricted diet. One certainly looks healthier than the other. Whether he is happy or not, that's a completely different story, because let's face it, most of us would not be happy with dietary restriction. But dietary restriction does indeed increase these sirtuins that I mentioned earlier in the body. So there is some scientific legitimacy or rationale for this way of eating. There are a lot of people today who resort to what is called the 16-hour fast. And this is really a way of restricting your caloric intake. The idea is to eat only during an 8-hour period of the day. And you can select which 8 hours that is. I mean, you can, maybe say that from the moment that you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you start eating, but 8 hours later, you will stop and not eat anything again until 6 o'clock the next morning. So this is what is referred to as time-restricted eating. And again, in animals, it has been shown to reduce the rate of aging. And it seems to have an effect in humans as well. Well, how do we know that it has an effect? By doing blood tests and seeing whether or not the blood tests show that someone is getting younger. I mean, there are a number of parameters that you can test for in the blood that are indicators of aging. So this is kind of interesting. But I think the real reason that this works is because it automatically restricts your calories. You don't have to count calories. I mean, if you're just going to eat in an 8-hour period, and that turns out, so it means that you're not eating anything up after 4 o'clock in the afternoon until the next morning. That, of course, means that you'll be taking in fewer calories, because so many of our calories, of course, come from snacking at night. So really, it's just a way of monitoring your calorie intake. The trouble with all of these schemes is that people aren't happy with them in the long run. You're not going to be happy eating only during an 8-hour period every day. But the results are there. And this is from a recent scientific trial. As you can see, weight loss, certainly, I mean, you'd expect that, if you're only eating 8 hours a day and nothing for 16 hours, you automatically will take in fewer calories, so you're going to be losing weight. But notice also the other benefits in metabolic syndrome and in our gut microbiome, which we know is an important factor in health, type 2 diabetes. So really, one of the major problems we have in North America is that people just eat too much. And just cutting down on that is one way to cut down on age-related diseases. Of course, there are a number of really far-fetched interventions also. These days, dietary supplements can be found in pharmacies, health food stores, etc. And there are advertisements on TV ad nauseum for these products, such as Prevagen. It is supposed to improve your memory, give you extra strength, healthy brain function, sharper mind, clearer thinking, all of this. And I'm sure you've seen the ads on TV. It's pretty difficult to avoid them, where they will have people telling you how much better they think. But then, you read the bottom, and then letters that are so tiny that you can hardly read them tell you that these are paid performers. Anyway, the story behind Prevagen, it is supposed to contain a protein that is extracted from jellyfish. And this is a protein called apoaquarin, and it binds calcium. Now, if you kind of, stretch facts a little bit, too much calcium in the brain can cause problems. So you can kind of suggest that binding that calcium may be of some benefit. But the fact is that aquarin is a protein. And proteins are made of chains of amino acids. And as soon as they get into the stomach and the small intestine, they are broken down into their component amino acids. That's what digestion does. So even if apoaquarin had some sort of physiological effect, it would never get into your bloodstream because it's broken down in the digestive tract. Another interesting little comment here, that the apoaquarin, in fact, is not even extracted from jellyfish. It's made synthetically in the lab. That, of course, doesn't matter. The origin of a substance does not give you any clue about its safety or its detriment. The only way we know that is by studying it. But of course, the idea that something that is natural is better sells to the public. But this is a total myth. You cannot tell anything about the safety or benefit of any chemical depending on its origin. Whether it was made by Mother Nature in a tree or a bush or by a chemist in a lab does not determine its scientific profile. Anyway, that being said, the bottom line about Prevagen is that there is no evidence that it works. So what is this clinical trial that they talk about, when you see their ads? Well, this is a result of what we call data mining. Now, indeed, they did do a clinical trial where they gave Prevagen to one group of subjects and a placebo to the other. And they monitored, they did memory tests, etc. And they found that there was no difference. So what do you do then? You do what we in the trade call data mining, hoping to get a publication out of it. You take a look at subgroups. All right, maybe it didn't work as a whole on the subject population, but maybe it worked better in men than in women, or maybe it worked better in women than in men. So then you look at only men and women in the study. Well, it turned out that that wasn't the case either. So then you look at age groups. Maybe it works better in the 40 to 50 age group than the 50 to 60 age group. So if you do enough of that kind of data mining, you'll find a group in which there is a difference, which happened by chance. But if that's the only one that you report, it seems that you really found something. No, there is nothing to Prevagen. There's no study that shows that it works. But I'll tell you one very, very interesting guy who is attacking this whole problem of aging. He wants to beat death. The guy we're talking about is Brian Johnson, born in 1997. And you see him here sporting his famous T-shirt, and I say famous because he has been widely talked about in the press, because he says that he's going to make every attempt not to die. Well, I don't think he literally thinks that he's not going to die, but he's going to try everything to extend his life as long as he can. And as you can see, he's 47 years old now. And you look at this picture, he certainly looks a lot younger. He started this whole scheme about 4 years ago, after he made millions in the tech industry. He's a multi-millionaire. And in fact, he spends about $2 million a year on the supplements that he takes, on testing his blood, on doing MRIs, etc. So this is not something for the poor person. Believe it or not, every day he takes 27 supplements. And here are just some of them. And he doesn't make a secret of this. I mean, here are all the supplements that he takes, as you can see, upon waking, with dinner, etc. Any of these that ever has had some scientific paper published about it that showed some possible benefit, never mind that it was in cell culture or in an animal or in a fruit fly, he will jump on that and see whether or not it has any effect on humans. Now, he doesn't only take supplements. He also watches his diet. He's a vegan, although he says that that is not necessarily for the health. He doesn't believe in eating animals. And the diet, I think, is one that we would agree is pretty healthy, because we know these days that a plant-based diet is really the way to go. I don't think it has to be exclusively plant-based, but anyway, here's the stuff that he eats. He, of course, eats it only during a restricted time period. And needless to say, he also sells his supplements and, his nutty pudding and longevity mix and blueberry nut mix, etc. And whenever there's any prescription drug that in any way is linked to life extension, he takes that as well. For example, things like taurine and rapamycin and acarbose, he will take. All he needs is at least one scientific paper that shows something. So, for example, for rapamycin, here it is, scientific paper published in the proper peer-reviewed journal, and it shows that rapamycin did have an effect, of course, in mice. He does other interesting things. He has taken blood plasma from his son, because he thinks that there may be some anti-aging factor in there. And he also engages in a very demanding regimen of exercise. And, if you look at him, I mean, he really does look ripped. But he's got a expensive home gym, where he does all of this, and most people don't have that. He also exposes himself to red light every day. He says that sleep is extremely important. So you have to have the right kind of bedding. You can't have TV in your bedroom. You don't want to have any kind of lights. You have to have a lot of sleep. I don't know how well he manages to sleep, because he sleeps with a device that monitors his nighttime erections. Because it seems that nighttime erections are also a hallmark of aging. He takes numerous blood tests. He says he's the most tested person in the world. He has whole body MRI scans. What do we say about this? No matter what the outcome is, he will die. I mean, I think that's a given. How long he goes on, I don't know. Maybe he'll be very successful, live a very long life, but no matter what, this is a study of n equals 1. And in science, that only amounts to an anecdote. No one, of course, has studied whether or not all these drugs and all these supplements in combination do anything that may be negative. So even if it turns out that he does lead a longer, healthier life, we're not really going to know which of the supplements or drugs he was taking, or whether it was the exercise or his dietary regimen, etc. So, it's just an interesting study. You can read up about him. All you have to do is Google Brian Johnson. And I just find it, scientifically interesting, although it's not very meaningful, because really the only way we learn about the benefit of a supplement or a drug is to isolate it, to have two groups where the only difference between the two groups is the specific substance that you're testing. But here you're testing 27 dietary supplements and a number of prescription drugs, plus exercise, plus diet. One thing we do know, because he has said this, is that his body eventually will end up in the Alcor Corporation's depository. This is in Arizona. Now, Alcor is a company that believes in cryonics. Cryonics is using low temperatures. Now, of course, low temperatures, as you know, can certainly have an effect on bacteria. That's why, when you put food in your freezer, it will take much longer to spoil than if you leave it out, because the low temperature controls the life cycle of the bacteria. Well, the Alcor company suggests that if people are frozen immediately after death and are preserved at a low temperature, maybe sometime in the future, science will evolve to the extent that there will be a method found to bring back life. So they propose to freeze a body soon after death, replace the liquids, the blood in the body, with essentially antifreeze, and then store the body in these cryogenic containers. Now, this is not a cheap undertaking, as you might expect. The liquid nitrogen that they use is expensive. And it's about $100,000 to do this. Interestingly enough, they want payment up front. They're not willing to wait until the body is reanimated. That's the word that they use. You don't die, you become deanimated. Now, this is something that Brian Johnson also believes could have some merit. So he says that if he does die, he will be stored in this fashion, hopefully to be rejuvenated sometime in the future. Now, notice that in this storage facility, some of the containers are smaller than the other, and that is because they contain only heads. The argument being that if science will have advanced to a stage where you can be reanimated, brought back to life, they will also be able to clone a body from cells. So all you need are some cells. You don't need the whole body, and you can then build the body from those cells. Sitting in one of those small tanks there is the head of Ted Williams, one of baseball's greatest players. His children thought when he died that they wanted to take the chance that, at some time in the future, he could be brought back to life. And his head was severed and is sitting at the Alcor Corporation. What can I tell you? I think scientifically this is absurd. Once you're dead, you're dead. You're not going to be brought back to life. But there's something that we can all do in order to try to increase our longevity, and that is to pay attention to what we eat. You know the old slogan, you are what you eat. Well, that's not just an old adage. I mean, food is the only raw material that ever goes into our body, so we are composed of what we eat. There's no such thing as a superfood. There are good diets and poor diets. I mean, some people will label blueberries as a superfood. Why? Why do they say this? Because it contains substances called antioxidants, even though this producer can't spell the word. But they refer to some studies, about the high antioxidant content of foods like blueberries, specifically the anthocyanins, the blue coloring in there, because of experiments that have been done on animals. You can take rats, for example, and you can feed them blueberries. They will happily eat this. They just love them. And it does have a physiological effect. It does change the way the neurotransmitters in their body work. It does something else too. It changes their ability to balance. Rats and mice are very adept at running along narrow ledges, ropes, etc. But by about 19 months of age, the time it takes a rat to walk a narrow beam before losing balance, as you can see, drops from 13 to 5 seconds. Well, in experiments at Tufts University, they found that after eating blueberry extract for 8 weeks, the rats were able to stay on the rod for a longer time, for 11 seconds. That's interesting, right? So if you go down to your basement and you see your rats falling off the clothesline, you know that you're dealing with an aging population and you better feed them some blueberries. What does it mean for us? Life is like walking a tightrope, isn't it? We know eventually we're going to fall off. Does it mean we can stay on there longer by gorging on blueberries? I don't think so, because this whole idea of labeling any single food as a superfood is a myth. On the other hand, there certainly are foods that should be incorporated into the diet, and foods that should be excluded. You know that we sling a lot of dirt these days at the ultra-processed foods. You know, the French fries, the frozen pizzas, the breakfast cereals, for good reason, because evidence is mounting that people who eat those foods often are prone to all kinds of disease. So we are recommending a diet that is mostly plant-based and low on processed foods. This is something indeed that now is proven. Something else that is proven, but unfortunately can't be bottled, is exercise. You don't have to be a bodybuilder. It's enough to take a brisk 30-minute walk every day, or if you can't do that, every couple of days. That is how you can really stretch out your life. Well, I want to leave you with one final little story about the human lifespan, which is not the same as life expectancy. Life expectancy is what the average person can expect to live, from time of birth, which hovers around 80. Lifespan is the maximum number of years that any member of a species has ever lived. For the human, that's 122, because Madame Jean Calment in France lived to that age. She had a birth certificate, so this is well documented. She was born in the 1800s. She knew Vincent van Gogh personally, said he was not a very nice man. She aged very nicely. At the age of 115, she gave up smoking because she said she wanted to lead a long life. She lived another 7 years. And during her last year, she did an interview with a journalist that was recorded on a CD. This is a lady who was born when there was no sound recording. She lived through the Edison cylinders, then the 78s, and the 35s, then the 8-tracks, then the CDs, and she didn't live long enough for all of the online stuff because she left us at the age of 122. When this reporter asked her, secret of her longevity, said, well, I drank a glass of red wine every day. I ate a kilo of chocolate every week. That, of course, went over very nicely with the media, who began to advertise that chocolate can save your life. Undoubtedly, the real secret of Jean Calment is that she had selected her parents properly. She just had the right genes. This, again, is a case of n=1. We can't push this any further, but at least it does demonstrate that it is possible to live to 122. I haven't found the secret. I mean, I've been in this business for a long time, trying to talk about it, find solutions. Not exactly like Brian Johnson. I'm not going down that route. But, sometimes I see ads for all kinds of products like this one here, Youth Restorative X, make you young again. I don't know what it is, but it intrigued me enough. Didn't cost very much, so I sent for it to see what it was. I haven't taken it, I haven't gotten it yet, but maybe next time, if I ever come back to speak to you again, that's what I'll look like. Well, I doubt it, because that kind of magic doesn't exist. The only magic is performed by magicians on the stage. If you would like to know more about what it is that we do, that's our website, and you'll find lots of information. And we have literally thousands of articles on there about every aspect of life, really. But I suspect that even with that being said, you may still have some questions. So let's see if we can answer any of those.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. That was fantastic. And also, I just mentioned to people that you have a weekly podcast, I believe it is.
I have a weekly radio show, which has been now going on for 43 years. And you can listen online, actually. Again, you can listen online on the internet. You go to cjad.com, cjad.com. It's Sunday afternoons at 3 o'clock. But also, all of my previous radio shows, they're all recorded, and you'll find them on our website, which you're looking at here.
Yeah, and there's also lots of content on YouTube as well.
Yes, we have a YouTube channel, and I've also written 19 books, and
Right.
the most recent one is just coming out this week, and it's called Superfood Silkworm and Spandex, and it delves into all of those plus a lot more.
Okay, well, I'll definitely look for that. And then you also have a Dr. Joe TV show as well still?
Yes, I had a TV show on the Discovery Channel that focused on food, where we traveled around. We went, for example, to Chicago for deep dish pizza. We went to Battle Creek, Michigan for breakfast cereals, Kellogg's. And we talked about the science behind all of those. Yeah, that was a couple of years ago on the Discovery Channel. But I do regular, little TV shticks on a number of local channels here.
Yeah, so lots of opportunities for people to check out the different
Indeed.
information that Dr. Joe has on this topic and more too, science in general. So we do have some questions from the audience. So the first one is very specific. Does fish oil really improve cognition? And I think fish oil is promoted for more than just cognition, but
It is. I mean, fish oil is promoted for all kinds of things. It is promoted as a, sort of a prophylactic against heart disease, but it also for brain function. And it's been suggested that women who eat lots of fish during their pregnancy give birth to smarter babies. The evidence is very, very scant. There are a couple of studies that show that people take fish oil supplements do a little bit better on memory tests. But one thing that I should mention is that doing better on a memory test does not necessarily mean that you're going to notice something in your everyday life. Just because you look at a list of names and then 15 minutes later they show you another list and ask you which one of those terms you've seen before, doesn't mean that you're going to see a difference in your everyday life in terms of memory, but it's enough to get a scientific publication out. I would say that the jury is pretty well out on fish oil as being a boost to memory. There's somewhat more evidence for it reducing the risk of heart disease, because it has an anti-clotting effect, so it reduces the chance of blood clot formation, and blood clots are what cause heart disease.
wasn't there a recent study that kind of threw cold water on the general benefits of fish oil, I thought?
There always is.
Okay.
There's no issue in the scientific realm that doesn't have a positive and negative study about it. So what we do is look at the overall context, and see whether or not there's agreement in the scientific community. What is the consensus? And yes, I know the study that you are referring to that showed no benefit, but it's also the question of whether we're talking supplements or we're talking eating fish. It's not the same thing. And I think that we have a lot more evidence for the benefits of eating fish than for the supplements. So the study was mostly about supplements not doing any good.
Right.
But I think eating fish, numerous studies have shown benefits there. Now, whether it's due to the fact that the fish contain the omega-3 fats or something else in the fish, again, that we really don't know.
Yeah. So another question from the audience here, Susan asked you that if you could explain the specific indicators in the blood that measure the rate of aging, and particularly as it's tied to measuring the benefits of time-restricted eating. And also, I would add is I assume that's something, whatever these indicators are, something that Byron Johnson is clearly.
Yeah. Well, you know, some of the standard ones, of course, are things like triglycerides and cholesterol and creatinine, you know, all the standard things that you would get in a blood test. And those, of course, are all age related. I mean, we know that those tend to creep up as you get older. But there are various markers of inflammation, for example, that you can test for. They test for bone density. He does full body MRIs and, you know, tests for the health of organs that you can see. You can see the liver, you can see the kidneys, you know, on an MRI. There are various kind of clotting factors in the blood that you can test for. You can test for blood levels of various nutrients. Test for blood levels of iron. So, you know, he undergoes dozens of various kind of tests. And like I said, you know, it's not total nonsense. I mean, he is trying to actually act sort of as a laboratory of one, but he is trying to do this in a scientific way. It's just that no matter how scientific he tries to be, we're still dealing with a trial of n equal 1, which, you know, the science doesn't mean anything.
Right. But if we go to our doctor and say, hey, can I have this test or this series of tests so I know what my you know age is
Yeah.
per my health, is that reasonable?
Yeah. I mean, that's a doable thing. There are labs that do this, where they will test for what they call your biological age. And they test for a number of different substances in the blood. You know, I mean, they'll test for specific amino acids. They'll test for specific short-chain fatty acids, long-chain fatty acids, and all of those have some relationship to aging. It's usually not a cheap test to do. Yeah, but it
just one step further. I mean, if someone were to do that, does it give them then indication as how they might change their lifestyle to slow their aging?
Yeah, well, I think it would give them a reason to think. I mean, you know, it's just like if you go and you find your cholesterol is high and your triglycerides are high and your bone density is low, you think, you know, am I going to do something about this? And so that if you find that there are, you know, factors of inflammation that are high, you might think, you know, well, what about all these diets that claim to be anti-inflammatory? You know, and then you look around, you say, well, yes, there are certain fats in the diet that increase inflammation. There are others that decrease it. For example, linoleic acid, which unfortunately is a large part of many vegetable oils, is an inflammatory factor. And so when you test your blood and you find that you have high levels of linoleic acid, you might want to take a second look at your diet and see, you know, or are you eating too much of that corn oil?
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. So here's a question. Another question about something we see advertised a lot, and that is the balance of nature supplements. So what's the story behind that?
These are all companies that try to snare you, you know, with some very inventive advertising. I mean, these are all supplements or collages of supplements, and again, they will take some individual study and blow it totally out of proportion. They ignore any study that goes against their grain. And one giveaway always, you'll notice at the bottom of those websites or on on the bottle, this has not been reviewed by the FDA. This is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease. Okay, as soon as you see that, you should raise the flag of alarm, because it means that they don't really have the data to back it up. Because if they did have the data, then you would get FDA approval, and then you could market it for whatever indication you want to market it for. So as soon as you see that disclaimer, it means that they just don't have the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, fruits and vegetables we all know are good for you, but I guess trying to squeeze all that benefit, and you certainly don't have the fiber, I assume maybe some of it into a pill seems a little bit of a stretch, I guess, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it may eventually turn out that there's some supplement that may be beneficial. But usually, if you have been diagnosed with having low levels of that, for example, vitamin B supplements for the general public don't do anything, because you'd have to have a terrible diet to be too low in B. But there are some individuals who have terrible diets or who have some medical condition who may have low blood levels of vitamin B, and then supplements can improve that. Or if you have low levels of iron, yes, then you might have supplements to improve that. But that only comes after a proper diagnosis, to correct something that happens to be low, not to just indiscriminately, take everything that you can get your hands on.
Yeah.
There's something else that should be, mentioned in this context, is that especially in the US, you have a law that was passed in 1994, the Dietary Supplement and Health Education Act, which is one of the most obscene pieces of legislation that has ever been passed, because it allows just about anything to be sold as a dietary supplement. And if you sell it as a dietary supplement, you don't have to have evidence, you don't have to have FDA approval. And when you're looking at a prescription drug, you need study upon study to show that this works. To sell something as a dietary supplement, you have to do absolutely nothing except put it in a bottle and sell it. You don't need to get approval from anyone. It is up to the FDA to prove that something is dangerous if there should be complaints about it. So this is really, the wrong way around. You should require proof before something goes on the market. And there's something else about those supplements, is that you may not even be getting what you think you're getting. If you buy an aspirin tablet, for example, and it says 325 milligrams, that's what it is, because that's regulated as a drug. If you buy your fish oil tablet and it says 800 milligrams of DHA, you have no idea whether that really is in there, because nobody checks. And whenever someone does check, and there are, researchers who check just to see what's going on, they find that mislabeling is all over the place. Sometimes you have none of the ingredient that is claimed to be there. Sometimes you have less of it. Sometimes you have more of it. So really, the dietary supplement industry is the Wild West, and it really needs to be reined in.
No, I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah, I don't know that everyone is aware of just the lack of regulation in the US for anything that's non-drug, I guess, supplements. But is the regulation different in Canada?
It's a little bit better. They at least require some proof of safety. So in Canada, anything that falls on the label of natural health product has to be submitted to Health Canada, and you have to show proof of safety. You do not, bizarrely, have to show proof of efficacy. But you have to show that, it's been tried, at least in animals, and shown to be safe.
Yeah. Okay. So we got a number of questions rolling in. So Peter's asking about exercise. Is there any evidence that in addition to a 30-minute walk, that other types of exercise or the intensity of the exercise has an additional benefit to longevity. I know there's been,
Yes.
I've seen a lot of stuff, yeah, about what intensity you need to have and how long, and all
Yeah.
that. Maybe you can enlighten us on
Well, I
all.
think, cardiovascular, just fast walking or jogging is certainly one thing, but that doesn't give you muscle. So you do need to have some muscle strengthening exercises too, because muscle wastes away with age. So, whether it's lifting barbells or using one of the exercise machines, that is as important as cardiovascular. In terms of intensity, I do a lot of running on the treadmill, so I'm very interested in that. And I used to try to run as fast as possible. I do 30 minutes at a time, and I used to try to do that as fast as possible until my knees started to complain. And so I started to look at the literature, and it turns out that really it's the length of time that is important. And whether you're running at 4 miles per hour or 5 miles per hour doesn't make a difference. So I've cut back on not on the time that I run, but on the speed at which I run, which is also much better for the knees. So I don't think that there's a specific formula, but I would say that if you can fast jog for 30 minutes 5 times a week, and 5 times a week engage in some sort of muscle strengthening exercise, which can be as simple as the rubber bands that you pull. So you don't have to go to the gym. I think that's the minimum that we should be doing.
Yeah, thanks for that. So what about, so Brian wants to know, what about memory enhancement like Prevagen? I think essentially he's getting at, is there anything else that actually really does?
There's nothing that has been shown. And you can bet your bottom dollar that all the pharmaceutical companies are working, head over heels trying to find something like that, because this would be a huge money maker, right? There's just nothing specific. What we know is that when you're in better overall health, including better cardiovascular health, etc., everything seems to work better. But there is no specific pill that has been shown to improve memory.
So Jack asks an interesting philosophical question, or maybe more than that. So are we prolonging life or just the death process? So I think he's kind of getting at,
Yeah, I know what he's getting at. He's getting at the difference between lifespan and health span.
Yeah.
And that's a very important difference, because what's the sense of living an extra 10 years if you're going to be living in misery, if you're going to be living in pain, or with depression or whatever? So we want to increase the health span. That's where all of the research is heading, not just to make you live longer, but to make you lead a healthier life. And that also, I must say, that's what Johnson is looking at too. He's interested in living as long as possible, as healthy as possible. But the recommendation is always the same: eat right and exercise right. That's what it comes down to, and select your parents properly.
Right. What about so CJ asks, what about probiotics? And I guess I would tack on to that. There's a lot about the microbiome or
Yes.
gut biome. So maybe you can kind of
Huge amount of research on the microbiome. We are more bacteria than human. There are more bacterial cells in the human body than human cells. We always used to think that they're just sort of bystanders, but they're not. They actually play a role because they do interact with human cells. So there's no question that microbiome concept does play a role in health. This is not nonsense. I mean, it goes back to the late 1800s when Elie Metchnikoff actually, received the Nobel Prize for his research into immunology, which was based on Bulgarian peasants living a long time because he thought it was due to eating yogurt, right? Well, that was the first probiotic. Probiotics are just bacteria that squeeze out disease-causing bacteria in the gut. And there is certainly legitimacy. And John Harvey Kellogg, actually, the founder of the Kellogg Company, was very much into that, into yogurt, not always eating it. He would even introduce it to the real portals, which actually made more sense. Because if you get it right into the bowels, that's where they have the best chance of replacing the disease-causing bacteria. But I don't think that's a sellable the methodology these days. But certainly, probiotics are, the science there is real. The trouble is with all the oral probiotics, we don't know which bacteria we should really be supplementing. There are at least 1,000 varieties of bacteria that live in our body and hundreds of them in our gut. We don't know which one we should really be adding to squeeze out the bad ones. So all of these probiotic manufacturers are making a guess at what those bacteria are. And then there's the issue of whether or not these bacteria can make it through the stomach into the intestine where they need to be active, because the stomach is highly acidic and it can kill bacteria. The best evidence that we have is for some digestive problems, such as diarrhea after a regimen of antibiotics. Then certain probiotic regimens, BioK, for example, is the one that has been studied. That's a commercial product, have been shown to reduce the incidence of antibiotic-related diarrhea. So this is, the probiotic is not nonsense like most of the dietary supplements, but there still are a lot of questions about specific products because we don't know that they really contain what they claim to contain.
Yeah. So here's a very specific one. What about Pressure Vision AREDS 2?
Yes, AREDS. Yeah. Well, this is a dietary supplement for eyesight. And it has mostly lycopene and vitamin A, which have been shown that if you have low levels of these, it will impair your eyesight, so that if you correct the levels, it will help. There certainly is evidence that for people who have low levels of the components of AREDS, if they take those supplements, eyesight can improve. But this is something really that has to be discussed with the ophthalmologist to see what the vision problem is. If it's a type of macular degeneration, that's when the supplement helps. But it's not a general for all eye problems.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Now, so Cynthia wants to know, what do you take besides a healthy diet and some exercise, and also combine that with another question. Is it better to take a multivitamin or be very specific for ones that seem to maybe have some justification?
The evidence is that there's no benefit to be had from a multivitamin. But those studies are done on people who don't need the multivitamin. This is the problem, is that the people who are buying all of these supplements are not the people who should be buying them, because these are the affluent people who generally have a pretty good diet. It's the poor people who have a terrible diet who could make use of supplements. I mean, if you want to take a multivitamin supplement as nutritional insurance, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're hoping to fill in some gaps in your diet. I don't. I rather focus on a healthier diet, but I'm not crazy about that either, because diet is only one factor. I mean, there are many factors that govern our health. So I don't want to imply that if you have the right diet, you don't have to worry about anything. But I must say that over the years that I followed all of this research, I eat much less red meat. I mean, I still like the occasional hamburger, and I never say never about anything. But I try to emphasize plant-based foods. And I like any chemist, I cook a lot because cooking is really just chemistry in the kitchen instead of in the lab. And I enjoy making a lot of plant-based foods, and when you get into it, you can make them as delicious as any meat-based food. So that's what I emphasize, and I think with what I eat, I think I cover all the bases. I do drink kefir. I like it. Kefir is it's sort of drinkable yogurt, is what it is. It is of course marketed as a probiotic. I do that, and I stay away from soft drinks. I think if there's one advice that could be given to the North American public at large that would have the greatest benefit for general health, it is to eliminate soft drinks.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah, and we're at the bewitching hour, but I've got two questions. If I could squeeze those in, if you got a moment. One is, what about chocolate? And the other one, what about a stationary bike? Which I assume that works for cardiovascular as well.
Oh yeah, stationary bikes are great. I mean, there's nothing negative to say about that. Okay, chocolate. If you like it, eat it. Don't think that it is doing you any favors in terms of your health. Yes, there are some polyphenols in chocolate. And if you look up Brian Johnson, I expect many of you now will look up Brian Johnson because it's interesting. He makes for a very interesting story. And he's been covered a lot in the press. He eats this cocoa concoction, cocoa powder, because of its polyphenol content. No, I don't see any miracle in chocolate. I eat it now and then because I like it. The only advice I would give about chocolate is if you eat it, eat the good one. Don't waste it on Reese's Pieces or Hershey's Kisses. You get the Lindt chocolate, or at least the Cadbury.
There you go. Yeah, I think isn't darker the darker it is.
Yes, darker is quote healthier because it contains more polyphenols. But don't look to chocolate to be a dietary supplement. Look to chocolate to satisfy your taste buds.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, Dr. Joe, we really appreciate you coming on. And I'm, obviously we could go on for a long time peppering you with questions, but just let people know that there's a lot of Dr. Joe content out there. Check it out. Covers a lot of topics. Very entertaining, as we've seen here. So I want to thank everyone for joining us on this wonderful day. And again, I'm so glad that we found you, Dr. Joe, and that you were able to come on, and a lot of emojis here with showing appreciation.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.